Hi, finance and investing enthusiasts. I'm Dr. Dale Herndon. I'm the founder and creator, lead instructor of Investing Essentials. I'm a finance professor and global business professor. I wanted to take a minute to discuss what is inflation. This is very important for a number of reasons. Certainly, we've seen it in our pocketbooks. We know that inflation has a dramatic effect on our purchasing ability. But how did it get here and what's the impact going forward? I think those are some key things that we need to understand as we start to look at what our investments and our saving plans are as we go forward. Now, this is a two-part series. This is just inflation itself, but I do have another video coming out on interest rates and inflation. That one's very important because I'm going to take the concepts of inflation, incorporate that with interest rates, put the two together, and give you an idea of what that's going to mean and how it impacts you from that perspective. Because inflation's one thing, interest rates are another. That's how we finance things. So what are these impacts going to be? But for now, let's just take a quick look at what is inflation. Let's first define inflation. Inflation is a general increase in the prices that we see around us each day, and it's also the fall in the purchasing value of our hard-earned dollars. Excuse me. But it's more than just looking at it from a general perspective of going into the store and thinking, oh, wow, well, prices have gone up. It seems to be a little bit more impactful because all of a sudden we cannot buy as much as we used to. We understood the concept, but it's really hurting us. And is it going to continue to hurt us in the future? Well, let's take a quick look at what is inflation, where we stand with inflation, I guess I should say. So I pulled this off from the Federal Reserve Bank, and what this is saying is this is the median consumer price index. This is a measure of core inflation. It's calculated by the Federal Reserve Bank of Cleveland and Ohio State University. I think it's the best measure of underlying inflation trends because it reflects the median price changes. Those are the things that you and I are going to be impacted by and what we buy and use every day. It provides a better signal of the inflation trend than either the all item CPI and CPI excluding food and beverage, some of these other metrics that are used to calculate inflation. So where are we with respect to inflation? As you can see right here, I marked these over here, but we're about 6.9%. This is per year, so this is the run rate for inflation. As you can see, it hiked up a lot in 2022. Down here at 2021, it was about 4% for the year, but we were coming off an inflation rate of somewhere around 1.5%. It shot up at the beginning of the year. We were well into the 7%. Well, I wouldn't say 7%, but probably 6.5%. It went up to as high as somewhere around 8%, came down. And we ended the year at about 6.9%. Now, the going rate is somewhere around 4% or so. The run rate at this point is 4.9% for the year, but we do believe that it's going to come down, so it probably would be out 3.8% for the year. At least that's what we hope. So, a huge increase in inflation over the past couple of years. 6.9%. Then before that, we had 4%. We're used to running around 2.3%. So this is a big deal. And coming down to 3.3% is certainly a relief from what we had, but it's still not anywhere near where we were. So hopefully 3.3% is what we'll reach. I actually kind of think it's probably going to be up 3.8%, but we'll see what happens on that. Okay, so that's the median inflation index. But really, how do we see inflation? Well, we certainly know gas prices have changed a lot. In the past, we would see gas prices jumping around maybe 235, 250, pop back up to 275. But that's not what we see right now. We're seeing gas prices of $3.50 to $4 a gallon for no real reason. It just seems to be that way. And that's exactly what inflation is. Other things we might see, we go out, we buy a bottle of wine or a glass of wine. It used to be $10 a glass. Now it's $12 a glass. They stuck a new label on, but it's still the same wine. Nothing changed. It just went up in price for no real reason. And that will also show up in restaurants. Restaurants have to jack up their price, so they have to hide it somehow or bring it into their mix or put it on their menus. So they hide their price increases by doing new offerings. They'll change the menu up a little bit and then they'll call it something a little bit different. Or maybe they just change the name or something, it just depends. And then we'll see it in something else, which is known as shrinkflation. Maybe you've heard that before, but something like I use detergent as an example, but it's the decrease in the amount or the volume that you were buying, but the price stays the same. So before it was 64 ounces for $10, and now it's 60 ounces for $10. So these are just a few examples of where we're seeing it. Oftentimes, we'll only see it in one or two places. We don't see it everywhere, but we're seeing it all around in everything we do. Okay, so where's it coming from? Well, it's coming from three areas. One is demand pull. That's where demand exceeds supply. We certainly are seeing that. People have come out of COVID and they are spending more on things like travel. Tickets to Europe used to be somewhere maybe around $600 round trip on a good day. Well, now it's $1,000 if you're lucky. Just buying clothes, dining out, certainly we've seen it there. I put used cars and trucks because used cars and trucks were generally lower priced than new cars and trucks, and that's the case. But they're significantly, or they were significantly different in price. Now, not so much. Sometimes even used cars cost more than new ones. Then we have the cost push. That is that there's supply chain issues, there's shortage of raw materials, things like that. So yeah, we had gasoline issues, but we also had things like computer chips, electronic solar cells. Stuff wasn't coming in from China. We had cargo ships sitting out in the ports doing nothing, waiting to pick something up or drop something off. And then we have this thing called built-in inflation. And this third type is where prices increase because we just generally expect them to. For example, if wages are going up, we just know prices to manufacture and make something are going to go up as well. So we just expect it to go up, and it kind of does. We have all three of these occurring all at once right now. We have demand pull, we have cost push, and built in all at play. However, it is starting to drop down a little bit. Now, I'm going to go on to the next cause of inflation, the fourth cause of inflation, which is called the money supply. And here is our money supply, what's known as M2. It's the money supply that includes financial assets held by households like you and I, savings deposits, time deposits, retail money market funds, things like that. Plus, it's all the things that we have sitting around, maybe financial assets such as currencies and demand deposits, checking accounts. So those are known as M1. We add that into these other ones, savings deposits, things like that. That becomes M2. And so that's the better tracker of money and money supply in the market. We can certainly see that this has increased a lot. Here we are and right before COVID. With COVID, it jacked up a lot. This means that the U.S. Treasury and the Federal Reserve are increasing the amount of money out in the marketplace. It's still continued to do that. It's starting to decline a little bit now. But what this increase generally results in is it increases the chance for inflation. Historically, when the money supply increases in global economies or any economy, there's going to be a drastic increase in prices in goods and services. And the reason is because there's more money we have to pay. We can use that to go buy for stuff that kind of becomes a push for it. But monetary policy would then change a little bit to try to keep the inflations low, so they would lower it. We're starting to see that, so we're starting to see it come down. Now, this whole money supply, this M2 money supply, provides a basis for understanding and forecasting money supply, inflation, and interest rates in the U.S. So we're starting to see that it's coming down. That means that generally things are starting to slow down a little bit. So high increase in money supply, starting to taper off a little bit. This is certainly when we saw inflation ticking up. Okay, so that's what it is. How does that happen? Well, the U.S. Treasury prints money, and they do other things. They print savings Treasury securities such as T-bonds, T-bills, things like that. But ultimately, the money supply is controlled by the Federal Reserve. They control it by lending money to allow banks to borrow from each other. So they have short-term interest rates that they use called the federal funds rate and the discount rate. There's also buying bonds out in the marketplace where the Federal Reserve, the Treasury produces the bonds, and then people go out and buy it. Investors like you and me buy these bonds. Well, so does the Federal Reserve of the United States as well as other central banks. And when they do, that gives the United States more money. We can pay our bills. The money supply is also controlled indirectly by the printing of money in bonds by the U.S. Treasury. Yeah, the U.S. Treasury does it, but they're also work in tandem with the Federal Reserve to help control and make sure that they're not printing too much at all at once. And there are some other measures that the Federal Reserve can do to control the money supply, right? But what they're doing now is they are not buying as many bonds as they used to, and they are increasing interest rates. This is all sort of starting to decrease the money supply. But so that should hopefully have a big impact on inflation. Obviously, what happens with this money supply is if there's too much that's out there, it chases too few goods and services. There's way too much. It creates excess liquidity, and that results in inflation, as I explained earlier in the chart. Luckily, we have been able to absorb this capital, this money that's coming out. We've had aggregate demand. That is the demand that you and I have been using to take this money, and we have been using it to buy things, to invest, to grow businesses, to do a lot of different things. So our demand for the money has been used to grow our GDP, and because of that, we haven't seen a high inflation rate until lately. Okay, so what does all this mean? What are the key thoughts going forward? Well, inflation will decrease consumer spending, which hurts corporate sales and profits. We're starting to see that a little bit, but inflation has not been impacting our consumer spending. It's been impacting our consumer sentiment, but our spending is certainly still out there. The Federal Reserve has been raising short-term interest rates to try to combat this inflation. It's starting to certainly impact what we're able to buy and what we do buy. Their goal is to keep inflation around 2% per year. Well, they're way off right now, so they very well may keep increasing interest rates in the near future. Right? That's not a good thing. That's part of that next video that I'm going to talk about with interest rates and inflation. All right, so inflation itself, I mentioned, is about 4% in 2021, according to that last chart, 6.9% in 2022, 4.9% in the first half of 2023, and we're starting, well, I wouldn't say we're starting to, but we're forecasted to have fiscal 23 around 3.5%. So estimates are 3.3 to 3.8%. We'd have to come down from this 4.9%, but we're starting to see it. Hopefully it's not too drastic of a decline. All four forces have impacted us, and it's why we have inflation. So increased demand, decreased supply, the built-in forces, and this increase in money supply all had a strong effect in our inflation, and all of these things are starting to decline lately. Okay, so come to this next session, inflation and interest rate. You now know what inflation is. You probably know what it is, but how did it get here? And we're going to now talk about whether inflation is going to have a bigger impact on us going forward, or interest rates, which is the bigger almond for us. Okay, with that, I'm Dr. Dale Herndon with Investing Essentials. I look forward to hearing from you in the future on this and other topics.